Hi, everyone. Good evening. Happy to talk to everyone tonight. And I'm actually back home at my parents' house in the United States. So just home for a couple of weeks for Chinese New Year. Glad to be home. Glad to see my family and my friends back in the United States. So tonight we have something cool to talk about. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about Chinese. And, I think uh, maybe I've mentioned I live in China right now and I'm studying the language. So I think it would be kind of cool to talk a little bit about the Chinese language or what people call the Chinese language. We'll talk about maybe that a little bit later. But one thing that I hear, a lot of my family and my friends, they'll say this when I tell them I study Chinese, and a lot of people say, "Oh, Chinese is the hardest language in the world." Chinese has a reputation for being really difficult, and this is something I've heard ever since I was a kid. Even my grandma, when she says she doesn't understand something, she says that's all Chinese to me, and that it has a reputation just for being a really difficult language, um, but I don't agree with that. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why I don't agree with that, why the Chinese language, why Chinese or why standard Chinese language is not as hard, maybe, as it's popularly perceived to be. Um, you know, uh, I don't really agree with the perception of Chinese or really of any language being inherently any more difficult than another language. There's no such thing as an objectively difficult language, right? Whether I find such and such a language hard or easy depends entirely on the language that I speak as a learner. If I speak English as my first language, then let's say Spanish will be easier for me to learn than Russian, right? But if I'm a native speaker of Czech, then maybe Spanish will be more difficult than Russian, right? But just because of the linguistic proximity of these languages and the words that are had in common and things like that. So that's one reason, or that's one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about a language being difficult or easy. And second of all, modern standard Chinese is actually a fairly straightforward language as far as grammar goes. I'll be the first to admit that it's that my Chinese is not very good, and that it is difficult to learn a new language. It is difficult to pick things up, and it does take a long time to learn Chinese. Um, but in terms of the grammar, there are a lot of things that Chinese, or rather that English does that Chinese doesn't do. That a lot of unnecessarily complicated things that English does that Chinese doesn't do. It's Chinese is what we call an isolating language. Standard and all Chinese varieties, I guess we would say, are isolating languages. Now that's not to be confused with a language isolate, right? So isolating language isolate, two different things, right? So for example, um, Basque, Korean, Japanese are language isolates. That means that they're the only language in their language family, right? But when we say isolating language, we're talking about syntax, we're talking about grammar. Basically, an isolating language means that there's no case system. Okay, there's no verb conjugation, right? A case system like in English, we don't really have a fully developed case system like Old English did, but we do have residual things like he, him, his, right? And verb conjugation. I live, she lives, Um, the Chinese doesn't do any of that. Let's this and as, for a beginner student like me, it saves you a lot of headaches. Let's look at this sentence. Let's look at this sentence right here. Let's take a look. So 他爱他父母, and basically, what is this? This says he loves his parents. He loves his parents. Okay? And let's look at this sentence. 他父母爱他. Okay? His parents love him. Okay, so let's compare these two sentences, all right? Now, I want you to see in the first sentence, okay, and the second sentence, how you can see my aspiration. Ta meaning he. This does not change for the subject, for the object, or for the possessive, right? It's all the same. Now, in English, we have the cumbersomeness of he, him, his, right? And even another level of inconvenience, I guess, is that English, right? We have gendered pronouns, right? This ta could be either a boy or a girl. We don't know if we're just speaking. We've written the Hanzi, we would say. We've written the symbol or the character for a male person. All right, so we know it's a boy because we've written it down, but if we're just speaking, we don't know. It could be a boy or a girl. Okay, so so just from here, the pronouns and the lack of subject, object, possessive in the language, that is an enormously easier thing for the student to learn than maybe someone who's learning English. Um, in Chinese, it's only one word, right? In English, it's five words: he, him, his, she, her, right? So anyway, let's look also at I, which means love, okay? And regardless of who's doing the loving, the verb does not change. That's awesome. That is so cool. I love Chinese verbs because we don't have to do anything like ket morphological stacking or even remember the famous Latin amo amas amat amamus amati samant, right? And not nothing like that. We have just I. It doesn't matter who's doing it. He loves, we love. It's all I. Nothing changes. So that's really cool. And even the word fumu for your parents, right? This is really easy. This is a cool thing to remember because fumu doesn't. It's easier to remember than the English word parents because fumu really just means dad mom, and it means parents. So maybe it's the word for parents really just means dad mom, as if your parents were some sort of like two-headed beast or something like that. But anyway, so the next thing that we talk about is, well, what about the tones? Chinese is a tonal language, right? And it's probably the most well-known example of a tonal language. So what are tones? So when I say tones, what do I mean? It means if I say like xie, right? And or if I say xie, right? So if I say xie, this means to thank somebody, right? But if I say xie, this refers to my shoes, right? So the meaning of a word changes whether you're going up or down or high even or down up. So Chinese has four tones, maybe five tones, right? Or sorry, standard. I keep making this mistake. Standard Chinese has five tones, maybe four tones, and this is a big stumbling block for people from English speaking and maybe speakers of other European languages who are learning Chinese because it's hard. Well, and it is hard, but and I'll be the first to admit that I have a hard time with tones. But at the same time, all right, Chinese tones, standard Chinese tones are pretty tame as far as tonal languages go. Like, let's look at Com, Com, which is a minority language spoken in China, and Com has arguably 15 tones, and I mean 15 is a much more uh, uh, a lot more to memorize than just 5 tones. Or maybe in standard Chinese, all we have are the 4 tones, and these tones are very simple. So, uh, ah, 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 ah. These as far as languages go, as far as tonal systems go, that is not that bad. Chinese. Standard Chinese is free of, and other Chinese languages were free of things like glottalization. All right, we're free of creaky, breathy voice. We're free of whistling, right? These are all things that other tonal systems might do, but Chinese does not, right? So I would say that Chinese is actually um, not necessarily an objectively difficult language. And I think that while there aspects of Chinese certainly are very difficult, like the tonal system, that these things are certainly surmountable, and that they're actually a lot of fun. So if you've ever thought about learning Chinese, I say do it. It's a cool language, it's a lot of fun, and it's going to be easier than you think.